Contrary to the view that manufacturing is dirty, dumb, dangerous, and disappearing, evidence is mounting that the United States is leading a deep transformation in ensuring that manufacturing is sustainable, smart, safe, and surging. This discussion will explore how the U.S. manufacturing enterprise and its extended supply chain are stacking up globally and projecting the most critical drivers for overall manufacturing success in the United States. Please welcome to the stage the Honorable Deborah Wince-Smith, Jill Engel-Cox, and Craig Giffi for a conversation mapping out global energy and manufacturing trends.
Wow, Dave, that was a fantastic presentation. I was just thinking, I'm a little tired thinking of all that we did in the last 3 years, but we are just started. And we're really excited today to share with you some tremendous new research findings, analytical insight into what CEOs around the world think about manufacturing competitiveness. And Craig Giffi, the Vice Chairman for Deloitte, is going to cover that. I'll introduce him a little bit more formally in a moment. And also Jill Engel-Cox, who's the Director of the National Energy Renewable Laboratories Data Analytics Center, is going to also share some very deep research you're doing, looking at a lot of the issues around the supply chain and the whole infrastructure for building the scalability of advanced manufacturing here in the United States. So, Craig, we got set up very nicely with the dirty, dumb, dangerous, and disappearing, and smart, safe, sustainable, surging. And, you know, I talked a little bit about Back to the Future. Just tell us, I mean, this is our third CEO survey we've done together, starting in 2010 and then 2013 now, and there's a projection to the future. You know, you work with companies all over the world. What were you most surprised about in actually the results for 2016? What really blew you away?
Well, thank you, Deborah. I think, first of all, let me thank Dr. Danielson both for his talk and the fact that you teed up a slide out of our report as one of the last slides he positioned. I was thinking about my answer to what this first question might be, and you know, when we started this, when we conceived this study back, and I think we first started talking about this back in 2009, went off and did the research, I don't think we were overwhelmingly surprised with the 2010 results. It basically said, you know, things we had heard before, which was BRIC was a phenomena, you know, Brazil, Russia, India, China were surging. I think in our manufacturing competitiveness index, at least 3 of those, all except Russia, were at the top of the list of most competitive manufacturing nations as CEOs rated countries around the world. It showed that developed nations were declining, and the projection, which was what makes this study a little bit unique, which is we ask CEOs not only what they think of today's competitive landscape, but what they think of the competitive landscape might be 5 years from now. So when we looked at those results, we kind of saw what we had expected, which was emerging market economies seem to be surging, developed nations seem to be declining. We projected to 2013 that we'd see more of that, and as we went forward beyond that, right, because it was a 5-year projection, by the time we would have got to 2016, it would have been game over for developed nations. In 2013, the world was still coming out of turmoil. There was still banking crisis in Europe, and the results were still kind of in between, right? They had the developed nations hadn't dropped as far as what we had expected. The emerging economies were still hanging in there, but were struggling in different ways. But by 2016, which I don't think we originally were sure we were going to do, because the notion was we only do this study if it makes sense to find some trends, and if the trends aren't really changing, if it's exactly the same, then why do it? But when we got to 2016, there was a big change, which was the developed nations kind of surged back to the top of the list. And to some extent, when we first looked at the results, we stood back and said, boy, this could be the 1970s or the 1980s. We saw the United States, Germany, and Japan at the very top of the list. We saw the UK climb back into the top 10. And while key markets in Asia, particularly China and some other developing markets, were still key players in the top 10, you saw amazing resurgence by developed economies. And it was largely around advanced manufacturing, right? CEOs around the world said it's not about being dirty, dumb, dangerous, or even low cost. It's about being able to secure the best talent, the best innovation capabilities, supply chains, and being able to innovate your way to a more productive future, both in terms of the value of the products they produce and the prosperity that can deliver to nations. And CEOs picked up on that. And right now, at least, they're projecting more of the same by 2020, where the U.S. actually takes the top spot for the first time, projected to take the top spot for the first time in a decade. And it's really kind of fascinating to see this develop. But I think a lot of it is around advanced technologies, and certainly the clean energy technologies are a key component of that catalyst for what's driving this resurgence for developed economies.
Well, let me just follow up a little bit on that. When our report came out, when the survey came out a little over a month ago, and we've had a Senate Commerce and Energy hearing that you were away, but I had the opportunity to testify, and the senators from both parties were really blown away by our report and really did some deep dive questions. What do you think the potential is now, building on that, with the fact that advanced technological innovation that we've been talking about here and leading through the partnership is so much at the heart of that, to really get a bipartisan consensus to continue to invest in the frontiers and do some of these partnerships, such as the NNMIs and things? Do you feel confident that the U.S. is going to continue on this track of being a leader in advanced technologies that underpin the manufacturing? I know I'm jumping you into the policy space, but
good.
That's really critical, because that's how we got here.
Yeah, let me answer it in two parts. One of the interesting things about this study, in addition to asking CEOs to rate nations, asking them to define what are the elements that drive competitiveness, what are the factors that drive it, we also talk about, we have a whole section that deals with public policy and having them rate the public policy environment in key markets and determining how favorable or unfavorable it is to their companies and to the overall competitiveness of the nation. And generally, almost anywhere you go in the world, business leaders are not happy about public policy makers, right? They're generally critical about all aspects of public policy, and we picked that up in 2010 and 2016, or 2013, and to some extent 2016. The other thing that's kind of interesting is it doesn't matter whether you're in China or the U.S., you would swear to God you're in the same place, because they criticize the same sets of things. But what was really interesting in the U.S. was the generally much more positive tone business leaders took around public policy, particularly as it related to advanced manufacturing. They rated some very strong policies around technology transfer, around science and innovation. They rated sustainability policies, which are driving innovation, to be very favorably received. And ultimately, they said that this collective set of policies that are driving innovation are critical to competitiveness. So that's the first part of answer to your question. The second part, I would say, predicting the policy environment and bipartisan support in what has been right now shaping up to be one of the most contentious and bizarre election seasons we've ever seen would be folly for me to try to give you a sense for whether there'll be cooperation on this or anything else. Usually something like this, it looks like it makes perfect sense, right? We could all get our heads wrapped around, all the policymakers, both sides of the aisle could get their heads around how important these policies are to be implemented and sustained and advanced to stay competitive. But I think all bets are off right now in terms of what exactly might happen with the next Congress. But let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that the trends that we've seen continue going into the future.
And mobilize this constituency, of course. Jill, there's so much focus, of course, on the large-scale OEMs and the role they have in this manufacturing transformation. And you've done some amazing research and analysis of the critical importance of the supply chains in the clean energy transformation of manufacturing. Could you share with us, how critical it is to build up the supply chain and where we are in the U.S. on that, and what we can do to even get it deeper moving forward in terms of the integration of the supply with the large-scale OEMs?
Great, thank you, and thanks for being here. It's very exciting to be at this panel, and I represent the Clean Energy Manufacturing Analysis Center, which was actually announced at this event just last September. So we feel very connected to this organization and this group. It was built from work that NREL and the Department of Energy had been interested in for a number of years before that, related to solar photovoltaics. And there was, as we were looking to drive the price down for photovoltaics and increase deployment and increase manufacturing, it was important to understand that entire value chain. So all the way back to the silicon, the polysilicon, the ingots, the wafers, all of those aspects to the final product. Because this is manufacturing for these clean energy technologies is a truly global enterprise where you've got raw materials coming from a variety of different countries. You have then the processing and the materials going through various stages, and then the final project assembly. So you can look at the end point and say, well, this is manufactured in this location and being sold, but actually it's manufactured in many, many places, different states, different countries, different organizations. So what CMAQ does is we actually look at that entire process, because it's very important if you're going to make decisions about how to deploy a technology such as solar photovoltaics or wind turbines and where you're going to manufacture those, to understand all the components of that value chain. So it's not only the materials, but it's also the labor cost, the energy cost, the tax incentives, the transportation cost, the land cost, the actual infrastructure, the cost of capital. And when you consider all of these, you can make very different decisions about perhaps where you want to site a particular manufacturing facility. And so what CMAQ is doing and what we're doing is beginning to look at that entire value chain for a variety of different technologies. Solar, obviously, because we've been working on that for a long time. Other obvious technologies, wind turbines, but also things that are related to energy efficiency. So energy efficient windows, for example. We're looking at wide bandgap semiconductors, motors that would go into different manufacturing, so things related to efficiency. And also materials and processes, so we're looking at carbon fiber. In fact, we have just released a carbon fiber report today that relates to how carbon fiber is manufactured and the energy and materials costs for that, and the supply chains for that, and then how that would be deployed into a variety of technologies, including wind turbines. And then we also look at some of the manufacturing processes that can support these, such as additive manufacturing. And I will agree with our discussion that we had a little bit earlier here, that innovation in manufacturing is how we're going to be successful and how we're going to compete on a global stage. But also there's a great power in that data analysis and collection to really understanding and make better decisions based on the entire value chain rather than just on a single technology.
So let's just look at solar. I mean, NREL has tremendous expertise and history in this space. And you know, we've heard in Dave's presentation and about the real renaissance now moving forward on solar. In your study, have you identified what are still some of the challenges and gap areas where we ought to be focusing investment to make sure we have the whole supply chain moving forward? And what, I mean, if you project and money weren't an object, where would you put some national investment to really move forward on the solar front?
Right, and really on solar, it's been a success story. Initially, it was very early on the technology development, coming up with the right materials and components to get it to optimize the efficiency. But in recent years, it really became a manufacturing challenge. How are we going to manufacture these, the panels and also all the raw materials at a cost-effective way? And that's where a number of the national labs working with a number of the companies themselves have helped develop these rapid, innovative manufacturing. So that has driven the price tremendously down. Now another big area is the balance of system. It's the other aspects of it. It's the framing, it's the coatings, it's the materials, it's the inverters, it's all the other elements of it are now a larger part of the cost than the panel themselves. So while we need to continue to drive that, we also need to look at those other areas, both creating more efficient and lower cost systems around that, as well as the installation as well.
So that'd be a very interesting area for public-private partnership and collaboration, what you just articulated.
Exactly. Yep.
Craig, share with us a little bit about what you see, and not just from our report, our survey, but from your work, you know, around the world on manufacturing. I mean, if you can project, we projected 5 years into the future, but you yourself as an expert, what do you really see in terms of how we're going to marry this tremendous manufacturing opportunity potential and what we're seeing with the challenge of the jobs, you know, and the whole issue, you know, of automation and artificial intelligence and all of that, because there's a tremendous anxiety in the US and around the world, you know, as we move into this space, you know, what will people do? What will be their work? Do you feel optimistic about that, or are you concerned about that linkage with jobs?
Well, I'm optimistic over the long term, right? I mean, I think a lot of the things Jill was talking about, particularly the advanced materials. I mean, the advanced materials are such a critical part of the equation. I know you've got, you know, other experts on the panels today. Craig Blue's here, but you know, a number of things: the nanotechnology, nanomaterials, you know, new materials, graphene-based types of things. All of these things, you know, are arguing for a much more sophisticated advanced material environment, and as Jill was saying, much more sophisticated process technologies that need to be developed around that. So the manufacturing of both the present and even more so of the future becomes a pretty advanced environment. Not that it isn't already, but it will continue to move in that direction. At the same time, separate studies we've done would show that between now and 2025, right, over the next decade, there's the potential for 2 million manufacturing jobs to go unfilled in this country due to a variety of factors, the largest being the retirement of baby boomers, right? So 3.4 million jobs will open up in manufacturing, but based on our current hire rate and our ability to find workers, you know, less than half of those are actually going to be able to be filled. The reality is manufacturers won't not fill the jobs, right? One of two things will happen. They'll go somewhere else to make the product, but those workers aren't in other locations either, right? I think the most competitive environment we have in the world right now is around the topic of talent, being able to secure the resources, everything from engineering talent as well as technical talent to operate in these new manufacturing facilities. So I actually believe that the combination of artificial intelligence and some of the other things, advanced robotics, those things will, you know, dramatically improve, continue to improve. Predictive analytics, smart factories will improve the processes and the capabilities of our facilities. But I think there's going to be a disruptive, you know, nature to some of this, and I actually think the U.S. is pretty well positioned. A lot of the manufacturing workforce disruption has taken place, you know, good news, bad news, over the last 15, 20 years during the great globalization of manufacturing. So I think we're better positioned for this, not because we're greatly positioned, but when we look at other nations, we've got the right demographics. We can actually draw on that. We certainly have the ecosystem and the educational system to be able to apply it if we can, you know, just muster up a little bit more energy around it. So I think we're going to hit some, you know, speed bumps in the road as we make that transition for current workers. I think it's, you know, unrealistic that all of them will be retrained successfully and redeployed successfully into these very advanced environments. But I think over the intermediate and long term, it bodes very well. And I think the future of manufacturing will be, you know, very advanced workers in highly productive environments, which will continue to look kind of futuristic compared to what we experienced back in the middle of the 20th century.
I want to ask you another question, a little bit about the global environment for collaboration and competition. You know, I mentioned in my remarks how the council was formed 30 years ago, and the Japan and technology trade competition, and now, you know, it's a whole different world. We collaborate very deeply with Japan on many, many issues, national security, cybersecurity, lots and lots of strategic partnerships. What do you see in these developed countries now that have surged back into the forefront? What are the real opportunities for collaboration where together we could do some things that would have a big impact on global sustainability and the whole issues around energy access and global prosperity? Because global growth, you know, is a terrible challenge, and the U.S. needs to be in a leadership role, and so do our partners in the developed world.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, Deborah. I think on a nation-by-nation basis, a lot of those developed economies have surged back, particularly the U.S., is because they have a very robust innovation ecosystem, right? The U.S. probably has the by far one of the best developed combination of national laboratories, university systems, leading industrial companies that are able to collaborate across that in a very strong environment for access to capital and the movement of both ideas and funds to be able to do that. On a global basis, I think that those same things need to play out, and I think one of the missing ingredients or things that we struggle with, and I'll go back to the materials area, is getting to standards. So around a lot of the technologies that we're seeing, we're into truly a new area, whether it's materials or artificial intelligence and how that gets applied to what we were talking about backstage into autonomous capabilities and vehicles. There's a whole new world out there, and I think collaboration around some of those critical elements around standards is really important. I think on the flip side, the current environment that you start to worry about on a global scale is the opposite of collaboration, right? There's protectionism seems to be rearing its head, and I think that just like manufacturing, the light bulb went on for emerging market economies that said manufacturing is the path to success and kind of caught developed nations by surprise. I think the same light bulb's going on that it's all about advanced manufacturing, right? So I think that the competition will be higher, the potential for protectionism, will interfere, and the challenge around standards and getting collaboration could be stressed at a time when we actually need, greater collaboration.
Yeah, I'd like to add something on this because, as a number of countries develop very rapidly, a lot of the customers are going to be in these other countries, in China and India. I mean, they're rapidly developing middle class, and so a lot of the customers for products are going to be in these places. And I think each country, of course, is trying to develop their workforce and develop their way forward. And I think in terms of collaboration, there's an optimization of where you should build things and on some areas. Where are the raw materials? If the raw materials are only available in a few countries, you have to produce them there. You have to get them to the point where they can be exported. So, and then, different countries have different natural resources. Some are solar, some have geothermal, some have wind. So I think in terms of collaboration, there's an optimization, again, along that value chain of where you position manufacturing and trade and work it together, around things like the proper labor force, the energy costs, the materials, and access to all of that. So I think that's another area in terms of collaboration. You can have multinational companies that really optimize their siting and manufacturing based on access to capital, access to customers, access to materials. And so I think that's where some of the optimization might come in.
And finally, on the global landscape, which we wanted to address here in the context of the U.S. and our leadership and partnerships, our report came up with some pretty neat new concepts. Could you just quickly, I know I'm watching the clock, but we're going to take a look. Can you talk about the mighty that have emerged? I know one of my colleagues is in the room from one of the mighty parts of the world. I hope he's listening. I don't think he is. He's working on his phone, so we'll see if when he hears his country, his eyes will light up. But
well, what's interesting, if we went back, we looked at when we started this study, as I said, the BRIC countries, the term BRIC had been coined. The BRIC actually looked like it was reality. And our study clearly pointed to the fact that there was a breakdown in the BRIC, right? That it wasn't, we saw the precipitous decline of most of those nations. Brazil has taken a significant, falling off the chart. Russia actually was never really, highly placed in the chart, but certainly China and India were, and now you've seen the steady decline of all of them, even with China moving down. We were looking for what's the next thing, and actually I think we saw it as an opportunity to try to coin a new term that was based on the data. So the countries that seem to not necessarily jump significantly into the top 10, but are making a strong move forward for what we call the Mighty Five: Malaysia, India, Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam. And when we take those five together, they start to look like a coalition, along with Taiwan, as a kind of an alternative to manufacturing in China, where things have gotten more complicated, more costly, more difficult, and that mighty 5 is asserting itself as a viable alternative location. Complex because it's in a bunch of different, it's obviously all different nations, but we see it bodes well for the region, continues to bode well for the region, but the mighty 5 looks like it's clearly going to displace BRIC as the acronym for investment and for particularly capital investment by global manufacturers.
Well, thank you. I want to just close our session by encouraging everyone here to actually get a copy of the survey. The graphics are fabulous. That chart that Assistant Secretary Danielson put up, I was with some very close colleagues from the UK. Needless to say, they were thrilled, and some colleagues from Japan and colleagues from India and others. And, the rest of the world, I mean, we're in a global economy, in a global world. We want the U.S. to be in a leadership, but at the same time, we want to collaborate. And I want to also, commend my partners in the Department of Energy, because we haven't had a chance to talk about it so much here, but you've done some amazing global partnerships as well, around the sustainability for the energy and manufacturing future. So 2020, we're going to see if the predictions are right, and I want to thank you, Joe. What's your next big study you're going to work on?
Well, we just released carbon fiber. We've done lithium-ion batteries. We are working on about 10 other different studies that will be coming out over the next year. And then in the fall, we'll also be releasing a benchmark report that's going to be a global benchmark of clean energy technology manufacturing that's going to cover 5 technologies in about 15 countries. So
oh, wow.
Look out
so
for
this
that
is going to
report.
be great to see how this lines up with what's come out in our
Exactly.
Deloitte Council. So thank you both for being with us, and thank you for not just your deep insight, but your ability to articulate this in a way that we really can see the policy implications for our country. So thank you very much, and we'll continue with the program.